In today's video, we're going to take a look at these three fantastic Highland Park bottlings by the Corti Brothers from the USA. Hi everyone and welcome back to the channel, and on the cast today we've got three fantastic and very rare bottles of Highland Park, all bottled by the Corti Brothers, who are based in the USA. And we've got a 1962 24-year-old, we've got a 1963 23-year-old, and we've got a 1966 20-year-old. So before we go any further, you've got to apologise to shirt and tie. I've been on the road on valuations all day today, and we're just jumping back into the office to get this video filmed, and I forgot my spare shirts. But also, before we take a look at these bottles and look at their investment potential, let's take a look at the history of the Corti Brothers, because not many people are too aware of the name Corti Brothers, and they've got a fascinating history and we've got a lot to owe them for. The Corti Brothers brand was created in 1947 when brothers Frank and Gino Corti bought an Italian delicatessen in Sacramento, California. The aim of their business was to bring new food and drink experiences to their community in Sacramento, and they made the name selling everything from meats, cheeses and fish to bourbon and wine, and it really is more of a supermarket by UK standards, but has had an exceptional range of very high quality products on offer. But it was Frank Corti's son Daryl who really took the business to new heights, and it's Daryl who we have to thank for the now famous range of Corti single malts. Now, although we've got three Scottish single malts here, Corti's first release was a bourbon, which Daryl wanted to offer as an all-American spirit to his clients on the occasion of the bicentennial of the USA, so basically the 200th birthday of the United States of America. So in 1975, he set out to find the best bourbon possible. Interestingly, along the way, Corti was asked many times why he was bothering to bottle and purchase bourbon. At the time, the market for bourbon was in decline, with vodka and rum proving more commercial. So this may not have been the most financially sensible decision on the face of it, but he persevered. Now, the whisky they selected for the bicentennial commemoration was a 16-year-old bourbon from the Willett distillery. Not the most well-known distillery, but as ever, Corti's focus was always on quality. They advertised the bottles in the Corti Brothers newsletter, reaching clients all over the US. However, to Corti's disappointment, the bourbon didn't sell well. And his explanation for this was that at the time, there was a bourbon named Old Forester that you could buy for around $5 a bottle, meaning that not many people were interested in the higher quality, higher priced bourbon that Corti had to offer. Fortunately for us, despite this disappointment, Daryl Corti had developed a taste for bourbon and whisky, and he persevered through some of the toughest times in whisky history. Arguably one of the hardest times faced by the industry was through the 1980s, which has now become known as the whisky lock. Essentially, the whisky lock was a term given to the industry-wide excess of whisky caused by overproduction, coupled with a significant drop in demand from consumers, and caused many distilleries to close. Some of these distilleries were demolished, others were converted into buildings for other uses, and the Rosebank distillery was turned into a beefeater restaurant, if you can believe it. And thankfully not all were demolished, and some are even coming back online. Brewer, for example, came back online in May this year, and Port Ellen will soon follow. And the crisis was really devastating to the industry, with some believing that whisky could never recover. However, across the pond in the US, Daryl decided that this was the perfect time to turn his attention to Scotch whisky. Corti's venture into Scotch whisky really began with a partnership with Avery's of Bristol, an historic wine merchant and independent bottler, obviously from Bristol in the UK. Daryl knew John Avery from his visits to California, where he was always looking for new releases of Californian wine, and Avery's was really pioneering and ahead of its time in terms of bottling single malts, as they were doing this in the 1930s, which is way before single malts really became popular in the UK. So it only seemed fitting that Corti would choose Avery's to help him bottle his first Scottish single malts, and in total there are around 10 Corti and Avery bottlings, including a 1969 Macallan and Glenfarclas, 3 bottlings of Highland Park, and a legendary 15-year-old Longmorn. And these bottles were all labelled clearly with the Avery's logo around here on the label. As well as sourcing casks from Avery's, Corti also turned to William Cardenhead of Campbelltown. And if you're not familiar with Cardenheads, they've historically held some of the most impressive and significant reserves of single malt casks in Scotland. And in fact, many of the legendary bottlings by Silvano Samaroli are from Cardenhead stocks. All the bottlings in the Cardenhead stock were bottled by their subsidiary company called R.W. Duthie, or Duthie. I'm going to say Duthie because I'm not Scottish and I don't quite know how to pronounce it properly. And there were around 20 Corti and Duthie bottlings, and again featured the likes of 1975 Ardbeg, these 3 Highland Park bottles, another 1964 Longmorn, a 1965 Klein Leash Brewer, a 1966 Jura as well. And Darrell also released another 15 bottles in collaboration with his friend Narsai Michael David, who was the owner of Narsai's restaurant in Kensington, San Diego. And in actual fact, although these aren't bottles for the Narsai restaurant, these 2 are actually signed by Narsai David as well. So there we have the really quite in-depth history of the Corti brothers, and the reason why I went into so much detail there is because I feel like we owe them so much. The Corti brothers are really influential in turning single malt whiskey in America into what it is today. The USA is the biggest export market for Scotch whiskey, and the Corti brothers were arguably one of the first people to start importing single malt Scotch whiskey, so we owe a lot to them. Now, the bottles themselves, you'll notice, are quite plain, they're quite austere. They're all in these tall, clear Liquor Bottle Scotland bottles, and Darrell was always keen to present them in a very plain, austere way, all in plain glass bottles, no coloured bottles like the Cardenhead bottlings you would have got at the time really. But you can see the spirit shines through, and I think that's really important because you can see there's a focus on the quality of the whiskey here. Now, the labels themselves, again, very plain on simple cream coloured paper, and all of the Corti bottlings from the start with Avery to these Corti ones that were done in association with Duthie, and also the ones that were done with Narsai's restaurant, they're all on this same label. The only thing that changes really is slight variations in the text. Obviously you've got the distillery name different, and you've got slightly different text here. So on the Avery bottles it features Avery's very prominently. They're all bottled at a high proof, 86 degrees US proof. Yeah, all bottled at 86 proof here, and of course because the American market they're all 750ml bottles. So now we turn on to the juicy bit of these bottles, and that's their investment potential. Now, these are a bit of a funny bottle really, and it's a bit like, if anybody knows the watches out here, these are like tropical dial Daytonas. If you know what a tropical dial Daytona is, you know how beautiful and sexy they are. But these are like your tropical dial Daytonas versus going out and buying a brand new 2021 Daytona. You have to really appreciate more than just the face value of the bottles, because the face value of these bottles is extremely plain. They are pretty much all identical, and the asking price, it's £4,009 for the 1962. The 1963 we've got listed for 3,857, and the 1966 we've got listed for 3,704. So these are expensive bottles. You could buy a Private Eye, you could buy a 25-year-old for these prices, but that's not the point. These are connoisseurs, collectible, and you really need the knowledge behind them in order to appreciate them. If you look at some of the scores that the Corti bottles have got on Whisky Fun, they're incredible. I think the world record price for a Corti bottling was just set at Whisky Auctioneer at about £15,500 for a 1965 Klein Leash. And all Corti bottlings themselves are rare. They're all really rare, and I think partly to the reason for this is that so many were drunk. They were sold by an American delicatessen selling whiskey, and it was often reduced. Corti often had to drop his prices to get these bottles to sell, so a large amount of these bottles have been consumed. And in fact we can only find about 205 recorded bottle sales for Corti Brothers bottlings across the board. And yet you look at the likes of Samaroli, you're looking at over 4,000 recorded sales. So these whiskies, although they're from the same stock as Samaroli's, because they had more releases and more volume of releases, they're more widely understood and appreciated by collectors. And I think Corti Brothers bottlings, they pretty much fly under the radar. And of those 205 bottles that have sold, 35 of those roughly were sold at Whisky Auctioneer in June, and they were all from the collection of Emmanuel Dron. And if you don't know who Emmanuel Dron is, he's the author of the biggest book on whiskey there is, Collecting Scotch Whisky, and runs the amazing bar over in Singapore. And I think that speaks volumes. Emmanuel John had so many of these bottles in his collection, you know, you would argue that there's not many other collectors above Emmanuel. You know, there are others sort of in the same league, but he's one of the most respected collectors of Scotch whisky, and the fact that he had so many of these bottles in his collection speaks volumes. So although these are not necessarily investments in the likes of Private Eyes and Macallan 25s and things that you can track and you can index and you can see the market moving month after month, you know, these are rare bottles. The 1962, we've only ever found 6 of these being sold. The 1963, I think we've found 5 of these being sold, and the 1966, only 9 of them sold. So they're incredibly rare, incredibly good quality whiskey inside, let's not forget, and I think that they're really, really good long-term investments, because the likelihood of these coming up again in the future are very, very slim. So there we have it. We've got 3 Corti bottlings of Highland Park, a 1962, a 1963 and a 1966, and they're all available on our shop now. And if you're looking to start a whiskey collection, or you're looking to sell your bottles of whiskey, head to the Mark Littler website, where we've got lots of blog content. We've obviously got the shop where these bottles are for sale, and if you've got any questions, just put them in the comments and we'll be happy to help.